The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. Today we will discuss another marriage betrayal story in which wife betrayed his husband. August 8, 2014, Dallas, Texas. A house on Maple Drive is cordoned off by police, shattering the calm of a wealthy community. Inside, they see a sight that contradicts the surrounding peace. What started off as an apparently routine situation has turned into a complex web of deceit, treachery, and murder. You'll be left wondering how well you know your loved ones after reading the narrative that follows. Dallas, 2000. People looked up to Maria and David Thompson as a pair. From the outside, their lives appeared to be ideal. At the age of 26, Maria was a prosperous real estate agent. She was one of the best agents in Dallas because she was naturally charming and skilled at closing deals. At the age of 28, David worked as an investment banker. He thrived on the pressure of his tough career and never stopped striving for greater achievement. Together, they occupied a spacious home in a wealthy area, furnished with all the comforts that accompanied their prosperous professions. They were frequently seen as the perfect pair in their social group, had fancy cars, and threw sophisticated dinner parties. Andrew, David's younger brother, frequently stopped by their house. At 24, Andrew was a budding musician whose light-hearted demeanor stood in stark contrast to David's somber and accountable demeanor. Andrew has the ability to brighten any space simply by entering it. Unlike David, he was not bound by the same obligations. Rather, Andrew led an impromptu life, passionately but unsuccessfully pursuing a career in music. He persisted in pursuing his dream and stayed hopeful in spite of this. When Andrew needed a place to crash or was in between concerts, he frequently stayed with David and Maria for weeks at a time. He eventually established himself as a regular fixture in their life. Maria and Andrew had a nice relationship initially. They would talk about the future, life, and music. However, as time went on, their discussions grew more private and personal. When David was at work, they discovered that they were spending more time together and exchanging secrets. By 2005, Maria and Andrew's relationship had developed into much more than a friendship. Neither of them had expected the passionate, covert relationship. They were aware that their actions were improper. However, they were unable to quit because of the exhilaration of sneaking around. They started meeting covertly, picking places where no one would notice them. On occasion, it was at a hotel on the other side of town. At other occasions, it was parked in a remote spot in the back seat of Andrew's vehicle. They concealed their affair from everyone, particularly David, by exchanging coded messages. Their affair grew increasingly passionate as the years passed. Andrew and Maria were infatuated with one another. Every second they were apart was agony. Their bond was made much more intense by the possibility of being discovered. The idea of stopping the affair was too painful to contemplate, even though they knew they were treading carefully. Andrew started pressuring Maria to leave David in 2007. He had had enough of living in hiding and moving around like a criminal. He desired to start a fresh life with Maria and be transparent with her. Maria, however, felt conflicted. She was used to her life with David, but she also had a deep affection for Andrew. It was difficult for her to give up the security, the comfort, and the respect she got from others. Because she couldn't fully commit to either life, Maria found herself torn between both. The flaws in their secret started to show by 2012. As the reality of their circumstances set in, the excitement of the affair began to wear off. Both of them were aware that it couldn't continue indefinitely. Maria was growing more aloof, fearing that someone would discover. Conversely, Andrew became irritated. Why Maria wouldn't simply leave David was beyond his comprehension. Arguments between them became more common as their stress increased. Once a passionate romance, it was now tainted by uncertainty and annoyance. David, who had always been wary of Andrew's frequent visits, made the decision to act in May 2014. The way Maria would smile at her phone, the unexpected work meetings that kept her out late, and the quiet phone calls she believed he didn't hear were all subtle changes David had seen in Maria's conduct. In order to learn the truth, David engaged a private investigator. The investigator tracked Maria for weeks, recording her every step. David's greatest suspicions were validated on June 10, 2014, when the investigator gave him a folder containing pictures and text messages. There was no denying the evidence. Andrew and Maria were having an affair. It was a deep-seated betrayal. David was angry in a way he had never been angry before, but he kept it to himself. Instead, he thanked the investigator in a composed manner and started to strategize. Maria was approached by David on June 15, 2014. Maria had just gotten home from one of her alleged appointments on this warm evening. With the evidence folders spread out on the coffee table, she was shocked to see David waiting for her in the living room. Although David had a serene countenance, Maria had never noticed the intensity in his eyes. David begged her to sit down without raising his voice. Then he started showing her each picture individually. When Maria knew she had been caught, the color left her face. At first, she attempted to deny it by saying the pictures weren't real, but the proof was too strong. The printouts of the text messages, each more damning than the last, were then produced by David. Maria broke down and begged for forgiveness, claiming that she still loved David and that the affair had no significance. However, David didn't want to hear her apology. Nothing could undo the damage that had been done, and his faith in her had been destroyed. David got up, gave Maria a final glance, and left the room after hours of heated discussion. Maria could tell something had shifted inside of him based on the expression in his eyes, even though he didn't cry or raise his voice. David's head was filled with ideas of retaliation during the course of the following few days. Anger and betrayal overwhelmed him, yet he wanted to control his temper. David was aware that he needed to be extremely careful, even thorough, if he was going to take any action. He started looking up ways to commit the ideal crime, spending hours browsing for murder and deceit cases online. He downloaded criminal psychology books, watched movies, and read articles. By June 20, 2014, David had a strategy in place. Killing Maria wasn't enough for him. He also wanted Andrew to suffer. David made the decision to kill Maria and set Andrew up as the culprit. He thought that he could do it without being discovered if he meticulously planned every step. Because to David's meticulous approach, every element of the plan was thoroughly thought out. David began by gathering information that would implicate Andrew. In order to establish his presence at the crime scene, he placed some of Andrew's possessions inside the house. After that, David started to alter Maria's and Andrew's electronic communications, creating a trail that suggested a furious dispute between them. He was confident that it would be discovered by the police and would support Andrew's motivation. David had all he required by July 1, 2014. The only thing left to do was wait for the ideal opportunity to present itself. David kept his composure and carried on with his everyday activities as though nothing were amiss. On the inside, however, he was boiling with anger and calculating the number of days until he could finally carry out his scheme. David's thoughts had been racing for days on August 1st, 2014. His feelings of betrayal and rage had transformed into a chilly resolve. He concluded that Andrew had to bear the consequences of Maria's death. This wasn't a snap decision. Rather, it was the result of a cold, strategic strategy that had been developing ever since he learned of their affair. David was aware that he needed to be careful. Everything had to be flawless. Errors that could link him to the murder were unaffordable. He started by tampering with the evidence to give the impression that Andrew was the criminal. David started by gathering the things that would eventually lead Andrew to the scene. Among these were traces of Andrew's DNA, which David meticulously deposited on a number of items about the house. He spent the following few days trying to remove any evidence that would link him to the impending event. He wiped down any surfaces he knew he would touch and ensured his fingerprints were removed from any objects that might have been used in the crime. Additionally, David started putting evidence in locations that the police could easily find. He had been able to surreptitiously draw some of Andrew's blood, which he put in a tiny vial at the refrigerator's rear. The framing of Andrew would be greatly aided by this blood. David was aware that the police would assume Andrew was the murderer as soon as they saw it. August 9, 2014. David had noted this day on his calendar. To make sure nothing was left to chance, he had repeatedly reviewed the strategy in his head. When the day finally came, David was composed, his feelings buried deep inside. Like he always did, he went to work and engaged with his co-workers as if it were just another day. On the inside, though, he knew that his life would be irreversibly altered by the time the sun rose the following day. David had prepared everything that night. He decided that he would confront Maria in the kitchen. In addition to being a space that was easy to clean, Maria felt most at ease in this particular room. Maria and David each had a glass of wine that David had prepared. A potent sedative, which he had acquired weeks ago under the pretense of requiring assistance falling asleep, was mixed with the wine he had reserved for Maria. David pretended to watch TV while he waited in the living room until he heard Maria's car pull into the driveway. The time was 10 p.m. the moment Maria entered the room. Despite her apparent weariness, she had a small smile on her face, which vanished as soon as she noticed David. David immediately reassured her that he wanted to hash things out and forgive her for what she had done, even though she sensed something was wrong. He offered her a glass of wine, which Maria took with relief. They conversed while Maria sipped the wine. Maria believed David's falsehoods and relaxed when he pretended to want to patch things up. However, as the minutes went by, she began to feel sleepy and her head grew heavy. David kept a close eye on her and noted when her eyelids started to droop. Maria was slumped over in her chair, unconscious, within minutes. David didn't spend any time. He had already set up the scene in the garage when he pulled Maria's lifeless body there. In order to give the impression that it had been dropped during a scuffle, David set one of Andrew's guitar picks on the ground close to Maria's body. After that, he made sure to leave the vial of blood he had taken from Andrew in areas where the police might readily locate it and carefully applied it to Maria's clothing. David was aware that the police would need this blood evidence to believe Andrew was the murderer. Then David grabbed one of Andrew's favorite kitchen knives, which he frequently utilized for his artistic endeavors. Given the knife's distinctiveness and ease of identification, David felt confident that the authorities would promptly link it to Andrew. With the knife in hand, David carefully positioned the wound to fit the size and form of the blade before stabbing Maria in the chest. He knew how to make it appear as though a battle had occurred because he had researched crime scenes extensively. David stabbed Maria and then positioned her body so that it appeared as though she had attempted to defend herself. He pushed over a chair, flipped some things around in the garage, and put some of Andrew's personal stuff close to the body. Everything was arranged to tell a story. In a violent struggle, Andrew killed Maria after attacking her out of rage. After David was happy with the scene, he started tidying up. By cleaning surfaces and eliminating any traces of his presence, he ensured that nothing would connect him to the crime. He was methodical and took his time to make sure that Andrew would be the only person identified by the evidence that was left behind. August 10, 2014. David called the police around 8 in the morning. When he informed the dispatcher that he had discovered his wife dead in the garage, his voice was tremulous and full of fake shock and despair. Officers promptly roped off the area and started their investigation after the police arrived, turning the situation into a flurry of activity in a matter of minutes. David did a fantastic job portraying the distraught husband. He remained true to his claim that Andrew must have killed Maria while responding to the detective's questioning. His accusations appeared to be supported by the evidence the police discovered. The bloodstains, the guitar pick, and the knife all pointed to Andrew. As soon as they thought they had located their murderer, the detectives issued a warrant for Andrew's arrest. When the police informed Andrew that he was being charged with Maria Thompson's murder on August 11, 2014, he was astonished and perplexed. Despite Andrew's insistence that he was innocent, the evidence was overwhelming. As his plan came to pass exactly as he had imagined, David observed from the sidelines, his face expressionless. When police officers showed up at Andrew's flat that morning, there was a lot of tension. When they knocked on his door, he had just woken up, and the sound reverberated menacingly in the silent hallway. The stern features of the detectives met Andrew as he opened the door, his face still drowsy from sleep. They told him that he was being held in connection with Maria Thompson's murder. Andrew was in complete shock and didn't know what was going on. He struggled to make sense of the situation as the cops handcuffed him and escorted him to the patrol car. Andrew was led to the station's interrogation room, a clean, frigid setting intended to instill guilt in even the most innocent people. Across from him, the detectives sat with unreadable expressions. They started grilling him about his connection with Maria, bringing up topics such as the affair and the events of the evening of August 9th. Andrew gave a sincere response, acknowledging the affair but strongly disputing any role in Maria's killing. He maintained that he could never harm Maria since he loved her. The investigators weren't persuaded, though. It was impossible to ignore the overwhelming evidence against him. They showed him the incriminating details. The blood, the guitar pick, and the knife all pointed to him. Additionally, the detectives showed him the texts that he and Maria exchanged, which disclosed their covert rendezvous and their intentions to be together. According to the law, these messages gave rise to a motive for murder. Andrew was heartbroken. He knew he was innocent, but he could see how it all appeared. He was struck hard by the situation's truth. He didn't know how or why he was being framed. August 15, 2014. Detectives noticed discrepancies in David's story as the investigation went on. They believed that he had been too composed for a man who had recently suffered such a terrible loss of a wife. His poise, which had seemed like strength at first, now looked suspect. The detectives made the decision to investigate David's alibi further. In an attempt to confirm his whereabouts on the night of the murder, they looked over security footage captured by cameras placed across the neighborhood. They were shocked by what they discovered. David's automobile was seen departing the residence several times during the night in the video. David claimed to have been home all night, so this was a big find. The investigators were aware that they needed to pursue this lead. David had left the house, but why? Where was he now? Answers were needed to these questions. Additionally, David's exceptional cooperation throughout the inquiry was noted by the detectives. He seemed to want to assist, which was unusual for someone who had just gone through such a horrible occurrence in their lifetime. Their suspicion that David might be concealing something grew as a result of this behavior. August 18, 2014. The police applied for a warrant to search David's home and office after gaining new information from the CCTV footage. They were convinced that David might have had some sort of role in the crime, and they were going to find out. David's office was thoroughly searched. Investigators searched his personal things, paperwork, and computer for anything that would connect him to the crime. They soon discovered what they were searching for. They found a number of internet searches on David's computer that presented a terrifying image. He had looked up phrases like perfect crime and how to frame someone for murder. The weeks preceding Maria's passing saw the completion of these searches. This marked a sea change in the course of the inquiry. According to the evidence, David had premeditated Maria's murder and skillfully set up the scene to implicate Andrew. More incriminating evidence was found during the investigation of David's house. A package with items linking him to the crime was concealed in his garage. A vial of Andrew's blood, gloves, and cleaning materials. The detective's suspicions were sufficiently confirmed by this. The investigators were starting to get the whole picture as David's meticulously planned strategy began to fall apart. August 20, 2014. The cops acted swiftly after obtaining the fresh evidence. David had been working as if nothing had happened when he was arrested at his workplace. After being arrested, he was accused of killing Maria Thompson and trying to frame his brother Andrew. Everyone who knew David was taken aback by the arrest. He had always been viewed as the older brother, the one who was stable and successful, the one who was in control of everything. Now, however, that vision was destroyed. After being put in a holding cell, David awaited his trial. Andrew, meanwhile, was freed from detention. Although his name was cleared, his life was irrevocably altered. He had been severely damaged by the experience. The fact that his own brother had attempted to frame him for murder was unbelievable to him. The loss of Maria was a heavy burden on his heart, and the treachery was deeply painful. October of 2014. David Thompson's trial was a spectacle. Reporters were gathered outside the courthouse, eager to learn any fresh information, and they kept tabs on every development. The evidence against David was meticulously laid out by the prosecution, who made a strong case. The jury was shown the online searches, the fabricated evidence, and the surveillance footage that exposed David's evil scheme. During his testimony, Andrew discussed his relationship with Maria and how David had deceived him. He talked about how he felt guilty about the affair, but he also talked about how shocked he was that his own brother had betrayed him so cruelly. As Andrew recounted the circumstances leading up to Maria's demise, the courtroom fell silent. He spoke in a passionate tone. David's defense team attempted to claim that the affair had driven him insane, that a brief loss of reason was the cause of his behavior. The jury, however, was unconvinced. It was hard to deny the cold-blooded, well-planned nature of the crime, and the evidence was overwhelming. November 2, 2014. The jury rendered a guilty judgment following 3 days of deliberation. David received a life sentence without the chance of release. The sentencing was a fitting conclusion to a case that had devastated a family and shocked the community. It was up to Andrew to reassemble his life. The affair had cost him everything, even though he had been exonerated of any wrongdoing. His sibling, his lover, and his mental tranquility. The Thompson family's experience turned into a warning, a reminder of how easily things can get out of hand and how even the closest families may be split apart by the most sinister secrets. What motivates a man to go to such extremes is still a mystery. Did he once love a wife and she betrayed him? Or the perverted reasoning of a control-obsessed mind? Please share your opinions with me, and remember to subscribe for future tales exploring the most sinister facets of human nature.